Hey there! How's it going? Thanks for joining me today. Whether you're relaxing at home on your commute or winding down for the evening, I'm really glad you're here. So let me tell you about something that's happening right now, today, in 2024. That sounds like pure science fiction, but is absolutely undeniably real. Picture this. In a laboratory at Harvard Medical School, a mouse that should be dying of old age is running on its wheel with the energy of a creature 1/4 its actual years. Its fur, once grey and patchy, has grown thick and dark again. Under powerful microscopes, its cells tell an impossible story. They show the biological age of youth. Even though this mouse has lived far beyond what nature intended, this isn't happening in some distant future. This is happening now, and here's the crazy part. We're starting to understand exactly how to make it happen. The switch that controls aging has been found, and it can be flipped. Now I know what you're thinking. Humans have been chasing immortality forever, right? And you're absolutely right. This obsession with beating death goes back to the very beginning of recorded history. In ancient Mesopotamia, the legendary king Gilgamesh searched for the secret of eternal life after watching his best friend die. Chinese emperors, brilliant men who built incredible civilizations, literally poisoned themselves with mercury because they believed it held the key to immortality. Spanish explorer Ponce de Leon died in the swamps of Florida, convinced he'd find the fountain of youth among the cypress trees and alligators. For thousands of years, humanity has thrown everything at this problem. Alchemy, magic potions, mystical rituals, prayers to every god we could imagine. And here's what's absolutely mind-blowing about this moment we're living in. All those ancient seekers were actually right about one thing. There really is a fountain of youth. But it wasn't hidden in some remote jungle or locked away in a magical spring. It was inside us all along. Think about that for a second. Every cell in your body contains the complete instruction manual for life itself. Your DNA doesn't just tell your cells how to function today. It contains the entire blueprint for development, growth, repair, and yes, aging. The fountain of youth isn't water you drink. It's code you carry. For the longest time, we thought aging was just inevitable, like gravity or the need for sleep. Your cells divide, they accumulate damage, they slow down, they stop working properly, and eventually you die. End of story. But what if that story was wrong? What if aging isn't a law of physics, but more like a computer program that can be rewritten? That's exactly what researchers have discovered. Aging isn't random deterioration. It's a coordinated biological process controlled by specific genes, proteins, and cellular mechanisms. And just like any other biological process, it can be interrupted, modified, and even reversed. Here's where this gets really wild. Scientists have identified something called cellular reprogramming. Imagine your cells are like a library, where all the books have been scattered around, shelves are falling apart, and nobody can find anything anymore. Cellular reprogramming is like having the world's best librarian come in and reorganize everything back to perfect order. The books are still the same books, your DNA hasn't changed, but suddenly everything works like it did when the library was brand new. Japanese researcher Shinya Yamanaka won the Nobel Prize for discovering how to do this. He found that by introducing just 4 specific proteins into adult cells, you can essentially reset their biological clock. These proteins, now called Yamanaka factors, can take a cell from an elderly person and rewind it back to a youthful state. It's like having a time machine that works on the microscopic level, but that's just one piece of the puzzle. Another breakthrough came from studying our chromosomes, specifically the protective caps on the ends called telomeres. Think of telomeres like the plastic tips on shoelaces. Every time your cells divide, these telomeres get a little shorter. Eventually, they get so short that your cells can't divide properly anymore, and that's when you start seeing the signs of aging. Here's the fascinating part. Some cells in your body never age. Your reproductive cells, for instance, have an enzyme called telomerase that keeps rebuilding those telomere caps, maintaining them at youthful lengths indefinitely. So the machinery for cellular immortality already exists inside you. We just need to figure out how to turn it on, safely in the right cells at the right time. And then there's the discovery of senescent cells, what researchers call zombie cells. These are cells that have stopped dividing but refuse to die. They just sit there, taking up space and releasing inflammatory signals that damage healthy cells around them. It's like having broken down cars scattered throughout a city, making traffic worse for everyone. Scientists have developed drugs called senolytics that can clear out these zombie cells, and the results are remarkable. Mice treated with these drugs live longer, healthier lives with fewer age-related diseases. You're not going to believe this, but we're also learning to grow replacement organs. Not just artificial hearts and kidneys, but organs grown from your own stem cells that are genetically identical to your original parts, but brand new. Imagine being 200 years old, but having the heart, liver, and kidneys of a 20-year-old because you've replaced them multiple times throughout your extended life. The really incredible thing is how all these discoveries are building on each other. Each breakthrough makes the next one more possible. We're not just finding ways to slow aging, we're developing an entire toolkit for biological maintenance and repair. It's like the difference between changing the oil in your car and completely rebuilding the engine while it's running. Now, let me walk you through what this actually means. The first generation of life extension therapies is already in human trials. Drugs that clear senescent cells are showing promising results in early studies. Gene therapies that extend telomeres are being tested. Cellular reprogramming techniques are being refined for safety in humans. We're not talking about some science fiction future. We're talking about treatments that could be available in the next 10 to 20 years. But here's where it gets really interesting. Scientists predict that the first person to live to 150 years has already been born. They're probably alive today, maybe even listening to this podcast. The therapies being developed right now will extend their life just long enough to reach the next breakthrough, which will extend their life long enough to reach the breakthrough after that. It's called longevity escape velocity. The point where life extension technology improves faster than you age. Once you reach that point, there's theoretically no upper limit to how long you could live. We're talking about people who could see the year 2500, 3000, maybe even beyond. Imagine what that means. Right now, in laboratories around the world, researchers are working on the technologies that could give us centuries of healthy life. Companies like Altos Labs have raised billions of dollars to pursue cellular reprogramming. Google's Calico division is using artificial intelligence to decode the fundamental mechanisms of aging. The Allen Institute is mapping the cellular changes that happen over time with unprecedented precision. This isn't just academic research anymore. This is a technological revolution, with the potential to fundamentally transform what it means to be human. We're talking about a future where your great-great-great-grandchildren might not just know you, they might grow up with you, learn from you, travel the stars with you. And if we can extend life to 150 years, then why not 200? If 200, then why not 300? If 300, then why not 500? That mouse running on its wheel at Harvard isn't just living longer, it's living better. Its organs function like those of a young animal. Its immune system responds like it's in its prime. Its brain processes information with youthful speed and clarity. This isn't about adding years to the end of life when you're frail and sick. This is about extending the period of health, vitality, and capability. The implications are staggering. Think about human potential when we're not racing against the clock of mortality. Think about the relationships we could build, the knowledge we could accumulate, the problems we could solve with centuries instead of decades. Think about the art, literature, music, and discoveries that could emerge from minds that have had 200 or 300 years to develop their craft. The switch that controls aging has been found. The fountain of youth was inside us all along, and we're learning how to turn it on. But what would it actually be like to live for 5 centuries? What would your body become? How would your mind adapt? What would love mean when forever is actually possible? Those are the questions we're going to explore together. Because the future of human longevity isn't just about the science. It's about reimagining everything we think we know about life itself. So let's dive into something that'll absolutely blow your mind. Picture waking up on your 487th birthday. I know, it sounds completely insane, right? But stick with me here, because what I'm about to describe isn't some wild fantasy. It's based on real research happening right now about what extended human longevity would actually look like. Your 487th birthday morning, and you wake up feeling fantastic. Not the creaky, achy fantastic that we associate with being grateful for what we have at advanced age. I'm talking about genuinely physically fantastic. Your bones haven't become brittle and weak like we see in today's elderly. Instead, they've grown dense as granite through centuries of constant regeneration. Think about this. Your skeleton has been rebuilding itself your entire life. About every 10 years, you have essentially a completely new set of bones. Now imagine that process continuing for 5 centuries, each generation slightly more perfect than the last. But here's where it gets really fascinating. You wouldn't be ancient. Your body would exist in a state of perpetual middle age, maintained by biological systems that never existed in natural evolution. The maintenance and repair mechanisms we talked about in our last conversation haven't just stopped your aging, they've optimized it. Your muscle fibers have been replaced thousands of times, each generation more efficient, stronger, more coordinated than the previous iteration. Now let me tell you about what's happening inside your brain, because this is where things get absolutely extraordinary. After 500 years, your neural pathways have formed crystalline networks of impossible complexity. You don't just remember your first century, you remember it in layers, like geological strata. This isn't just about having a good memory. Your brain has literally restructured itself to handle temporal depth. Think about how memory works right now. You remember yesterday pretty clearly. Last week gets a bit fuzzy. Last month becomes highlights and general impressions. Last year, you probably remember a few key moments and the general emotional tone. Now imagine that same pattern, but stretched across 5 centuries. Your most recent decades remain vivid and immediate. You can recall conversations, meals, the feeling of rain on your skin from last Tuesday in 2450. Your middle centuries compress into rich emotional impressions and pivotal moments. The great love affair of your 230s, the career change at 312, the loss that broke your heart at 407. And your earliest 100 years? They exist as foundational knowledge, the bedrock of who you are, not memories you actively recall, but understanding that shaped everything that came after. The really incredible part is that new brain structures have emerged to manage this temporal complexity. Your hippocampus, the brain region that forms new memories, has developed what researchers call subsidiary processing centers. It's like your brain has grown additional hard drives to handle the massive data storage requirements of a 500-year life. Memory becomes less like a library where you go to look things up, and more like a living ecosystem. Old experiences compost into wisdom, providing rich soil for new experiences to bloom across ancient neural pathways. You develop what scientists are calling temporal intuition, the ability to recognize patterns across centuries, to see how events separated by decades or even centuries connect in ways that shorter-lived humans could never perceive. But let's talk about what this means for your capabilities. After 500 years, you've become something unprecedented in human history. Your immune system has encountered and defeated every pathogen imaginable. Not just the common cold and flu, but diseases that haven't even evolved yet. You've survived multiple pandemics, each one training your immune response to be more sophisticated. Your body's defense systems work with a precision that would make today's best military look amateur. Your DNA repair mechanisms have reached breathtaking accuracy through centuries of refinement. The cellular maintenance systems we discussed, those aren't just preventing aging anymore. They've turned your body into a self-improving machine. Every cell division happens with the precision of a Swiss watch. Every protein folds with perfect accuracy. Every cellular function operates at peak efficiency. Here's something that might surprise you. You're not just old, you're evolved. 5 centuries of cellular optimization has transformed you into something genuinely new. Your cardiovascular system pumps blood with efficiency that puts 20-year-olds to shame. Your digestive system extracts nutrients with incredible effectiveness. Your nervous system processes information at speeds that seem almost supernatural. And your senses, they've been refined across centuries of experience. You can hear subtleties in music that would escape shorter-lived humans. You can see patterns in art, nature, human behavior that only become visible across vast timescales. You can taste complexities in food that develop from having experienced centuries of cuisine evolution. Touch, smell, all of your senses have been educated by time in ways we can barely imagine. The really wild part is your physical capabilities. We think of extreme longevity as being fragile, right? Needing extra care, moving slowly, being careful. But that's based on our current model, where aging means breakdown. In this scenario, aging means optimization. You're not a 487-year-old human. You're a human who has spent 487 years becoming the absolute best version of what a human can be. Your reflexes have been honed by centuries of experience. Your balance is perfect. You've had 500 years to master the relationship between your body and gravity. Your coordination is flawless because every movement has been practiced, refined, optimized across decades of repetition. You move through the world with a grace that comes only from having inhabited your body for centuries. But here's where it gets really interesting from a biological perspective. Your endocrine system, the network of glands that produce hormones, has learned to maintain perfect balance. No more mood swings from hormonal fluctuations. No more energy crashes. Your body has spent centuries learning to regulate itself with mechanical precision. Your metabolism has become incredibly efficient. 5 centuries of optimization means your body knows exactly how much energy it needs, when it needs it, and how to get it. You don't get tired the way shorter-lived humans do because your energy systems have been perfected through time. And here's something really fascinating. Your circadian rhythms, your body's internal clock, have expanded. Instead of operating on a 24-hour cycle, your body has learned to think in longer rhythms. Weekly cycles, monthly cycles, seasonal cycles that most humans never even notice. You're synchronized with time itself in ways that are completely alien to current human experience. Your skin has regenerated thousands of times, each iteration learning from environmental damage and adapting. You don't just look young. Your skin has become incredibly resilient. It heals faster, resists damage better, and maintains elasticity that defies everything we know about aging. Now, let's talk about your brain's processing power, because this is where 5 centuries really shows its impact. You've accumulated not just knowledge, but wisdom, the pattern recognition that comes from seeing the same situations play out across decades and centuries. You can predict human behavior with uncanny accuracy, because you've watched the same personality types navigate similar challenges hundreds of times. You've developed what researchers call temporal perspective, the ability to see current events not as isolated incidents, but as part of vast patterns that unfold across centuries. Political movements, social trends, technological developments. You can see their deep structure because you've watched them cycle through variations for hundreds of years. Your problem-solving abilities have become extraordinary, not because your brain is inherently more powerful, but because you've had centuries to develop sophisticated mental models. You approach challenges with a toolkit built from 500 years of experience. 500 years of making mistakes, learning, adapting, improving. The really remarkable thing is how this affects your relationship with risk and uncertainty. When you've lived through 5 centuries, you've seen everything. Economic collapses, technological revolutions, social upheavals. They're not catastrophic unknowns anymore. They're patterns you recognize, challenges you've navigated before. You develop a deep calm that comes from temporal perspective. But perhaps the most profound change is in your relationship with your own mortality. Death isn't the approaching deadline that drives urgency and sometimes panic in shorter-lived humans. It's a distant choice you might make someday, but not an inevitable fate rushing toward you. This changes everything about how you approach life, relationships, goals, meaning. You move through the world with the patience of geological time and the energy of youth. You're simultaneously ancient and vital, wise and curious, experienced and still growing. You're not an old human who's lived a long time. You're an evolved human who has used time to become something unprecedented. And this isn't science fiction anymore. The research is happening now. The technologies that could make this possible are being developed in laboratories around the world. The biological mechanisms that would allow this kind of optimization are being decoded, refined, prepared for human application. Your 5-century body isn't just about living longer, it's about becoming better. Not just surviving, but evolving. Not just aging, but improving with time. And the most incredible part? We're just getting started understanding what becomes possible when human life extends not just beyond current limits, but beyond anything in the history of our species. So that's your 487th birthday morning. But what about the people you'd share it with? What happens to love, family, relationships when forever becomes possible? Maria meets David in 2137. She's 112. He's 93. Now I want you to really picture this scene, because it represents something that has never existed in human history. They meet at a coffee shop in Neo, Singapore, and when their eyes first connect, something electric happens. It's that instant recognition, that spark that's been the same for as long as humans have fallen in love. But here's the thing that would blow the mind of anyone from our current era. They fall in love with the passion of teenagers and the wisdom of centenarians. Think about that for a second. Maria has lived through 112 years of experience, heartbreak, joy, loss, triumph. She's loved before, deeply and completely. She's had her heart broken, has broken hearts, has learned the intricate dance of human connection across more than a century of relationships. David, at 93, carries nearly a century of his own emotional archaeology. Yet when they meet, the intensity is absolutely electric. This isn't the cautious, measured affection we might expect from people who've seen so much life. It's passionate, consuming, overwhelming, because their bodies and brains exist in a state of perpetual vitality. The hormones of attraction, the neurotransmitters of infatuation, the whole biochemical symphony of falling in love is still playing at full volume, even after more than a century of life experience. Their wedding is unlike anything we can imagine today. The guest list includes Maria's great-great-grandmother, still spry and sharp at 308 years old. She gives a toast that references her own wedding 273 years earlier. The flower girl is David's great-niece, age 47, who throws petals with the enthusiasm of a child, because in this world, she's still considered quite young. But here's where things get really interesting. The marriage contract they sign includes something that would be unimaginable to previous generations. It's a renewal clause every 50 years, because forever means something completely different when forever is actually possible. See, in our current world, till death do us part creates a kind of urgency and finality to marriage vows. You're committing to someone for what you know will be a limited time, maybe 40, 50, 60 years if you're lucky. But when you're looking at potentially centuries together, the entire concept of marriage transforms. Some couples, like Maria and David, choose the renewal path. Every 50 years, they consciously recommit, celebrating not just their ongoing love, but their intentional choice to continue growing together. It's not about obligation or legal binding. It's about active, enthusiastic choice, renewed across decades. Other couples develop what relationship counselors are calling cyclical intimacy. They'll spend 60 years in passionate romantic partnership, then transition to deep friendship for 30 years, then maybe rediscover romance again for another 40 years. They cycle through different types of connection, sometimes lovers, sometimes best friends, sometimes co-adventurers, sometimes co-parents to children who might themselves be centuries old. Society has fractured and reformed around these new realities in ways that challenge everything we think we know about human relationships. The nuclear family, that basic unit of parents and children, has exploded into something completely unprecedented. We're talking about vast constellation networks where your grandfather's new wife might be younger than your daughter, where family trees become family forests, spreading in every direction across time. Children grow up with 20 living generations of ancestors, each carrying different values from their birth century. Imagine family dinners where the great-great-great-grandmother who was born in 1950 sits next to the great-great-grandson born in 2240. They're separated not just by age, but by completely different technological eras, social movements, historical contexts. The word family stretches to encompass relationships that span 300 years and include thousands of individuals. Family reunions become massive gatherings requiring conference centers. Genealogy becomes a full-time profession, helping people trace relationships through centuries of branching connections. And let me tell you about the economic implications of this, because they're staggering. Traditional inheritance completely collapses when the dead refuse to die. Why would you pass on your wealth to your children when you're going to outlive them by centuries? Multi-generational wealth planning becomes multi-century wealth planning. Estate lawyers develop specialties in temporal asset management. Power concentrates in ways we've never seen before. The ancient wealthy, we're talking people who've been accumulating resources for 2, 3, 4 centuries, become almost godlike in their influence. They've had time to build networks, relationships, knowledge bases that span multiple human lifetimes. Meanwhile, the young struggle to find their place in a world where entry-level positions require 60 years of experience. New social structures emerge from this chaos, and some of them are fascinating, others deeply troubling. Century clubs form, exclusive groups for those who've passed specific age milestones. The 200-year-olds look down on mere centenarians the way we might look down on teenagers. The 300-year-olds form an aristocracy of time, with social prestige based not on birth or wealth, but on accumulated years. These temporal class systems create their own forms of discrimination. Age bias takes on completely new meaning when we're talking about centuries of difference. Job markets develop categories we can't imagine. Positions for early centuries versus mature centuries versus deep time candidates. Dating apps sort matches by century cohorts because the cultural gap between someone born in 2100 and someone born in 2300 is larger than the gap between a medieval peasant and a modern person. Romance itself develops an entirely new vocabulary. Decade dating becomes the term for casual, short-term relationships. Century bonding indicates serious, long-term commitment. Some couples practice what they call temporal monogamy, exclusive relationships for predetermined periods, maybe 50 or 100 years, before conscious transition to friendship or separation. The ancient art of matchmaking evolves into something called temporal compatibility analysis. Counselors help potential partners assess whether they age at similar biological rates, whether they share compatible century cohort values, whether their life goals are aligned across the vast desert of time stretching ahead. Some couples develop the most extraordinary relationships in human history. I'm talking about love stories that unfold across 3 centuries. Imagine watching your beloved change and grow not just across decades, but across the span of time that once encompassed entire civilizations. You fall in love with Maria version 1.0 at age 112. 50 years later, you're married to Maria version 2.0, still recognizably the same person, but transformed by half a century of shared experiences. Another 50 years, and you're living with Maria version 3.0. The question becomes, how many versions of someone can you love? How many times can the same person become someone new while remaining fundamentally themselves? Some couples find this constant evolution endlessly fascinating. They're essentially married to a series of related but distinct individuals across the centuries. Others find it disorienting, even heartbreaking, to watch their original beloved transform into someone they might not have chosen. Then there are the challenges that emerge around children and parenting. When you might live for 5 centuries, when do you have children? Do you have them early in life, when you're still figuring out who you are? Do you wait until you're more mature, say around age 150? Do you have multiple families across the centuries? Some people become what we call serial parents, raising children in different centuries with different partners. Your first set of kids might be born when you're 60, your second set when you're 180, your third when you're 320. Each generation grows up in completely different technological and social environments. Other people choose to remain child-free for their first couple centuries, then dedicate their later centuries to parenting with the patience and wisdom that only deep time can provide. Imagine being raised by parents who've spent 200 years preparing for parenthood, who've had centuries to develop emotional maturity and life wisdom. The parent-child relationship itself transforms when parents outlive children by centuries. Traditional roles reverse and re-reverse multiple times. Your daughter might be your mentor when you're both in your second century. Your son might become your caregiver when you're going through a difficult period in your third century, even though he's chronologically older than you were when you first became a parent. Grief takes on entirely new dimensions when relationships span centuries. When Maria's great-great-grandmother finally chooses to end her life at age 431, the mourning process involves not just her immediate family, but hundreds of descendants across dozens of generations. The funeral becomes a celebration of 4 centuries of accumulated relationships, impacts, love stories, family memories. But perhaps the most profound change is in how people think about commitment and growth. In our current world, we often talk about people growing apart in relationships. When you have centuries together, growing apart becomes less of a relationship killer and more of a natural rhythm. Couples learn to grow apart and then grow back together, like dancers who separate and reunite across the span of centuries. Love in the time of eternity isn't just about finding someone you can stand for 70 years. It's about finding someone you can continue discovering for 300 years. Someone whose personal evolution complements your own across the vast span of deep time. Someone who remains fascinating not despite the centuries, but because of them. The most successful long-term couples, and I'm talking about relationships that last 2, 3 centuries, develop what psychologists call evolutionary intimacy. They don't just love each other. They're committed to supporting each other's continual transformation across time. They become each other's witnesses, collaborators in the great project of becoming whoever they're meant to become across the span of centuries. And here's the beautiful thing. In a world where time becomes abundant, where the pressure of mortality no longer drives urgency, love can develop depths and complexities that have never been possible in human history. People have time to truly know each other, not just the version they meet at 20 or 30, but all the versions they become across the centuries. Love in the time of eternity becomes less about finding your one true soulmate and more about choosing, again and again, to build something beautiful with another consciousness across the vast expanse of time. It's about becoming soulmates rather than finding them. But what happens to work, to careers, to the entire economic structure of society when people live for centuries? How does money even work when everyone has 500 years to accumulate wealth? Let me tell you about Johann's bank account. In 2150, at the relatively young age of 73, he deposits $1,000 into a simple savings account. Nothing fancy, just 3% annual interest. The kind of boring, conservative investment that financial advisors have recommended for generations. Fast forward to his 400th birthday, and here's what will blow your mind. That modest $1,000 deposit has grown to over $100 million. 100 million. From $1,000, just by waiting. Now here's the catch that changes everything about economics as we know it. So has everyone else's money. When time becomes abundant, when you can literally wait centuries for investments to mature, the entire concept of money transforms into something unrecognizable. Think about what this means. Right now in our world, compound interest is already called the eighth wonder of the world. Einstein allegedly said it was the most powerful force in the universe. But that's based on human lifespans, where you might see your money compound for 30, 40, maybe 50 years if you start investing young and live to a ripe old age. What happens when you have 3, 4, 5 centuries to let that mathematical magic work? Inflation doesn't behave the same way when investors think in centuries rather than decades. Stock markets develop what economists are calling ultra-long positions, investments held not for years, but for hundreds of years. Companies begin planning not in quarterly reports or even 5-year strategies, but in quarter-millennium increments. Picture walking into a corporate boardroom in the year 2350, where executives are discussing the company's 1,000-year plan. The CEO, now in her 2nd century of life, presents strategies that won't bear fruit until the year 3350. Shareholders who bought stock in 2200 are still waiting for their long-term investments to mature. The very concept of long-term thinking extends beyond anything we can currently imagine, but the real revolution isn't just in how long people can wait, it's in how work itself becomes completely unrecognizable. Gone are careers in the way we understand them today. Instead, human life becomes organized around what researchers call cycles of mastery. Here's how it works. You spend your first 40 years becoming a surgeon. You practice medicine for 60 years, becoming truly excellent at your craft in ways that are impossible when you only have a few decades. But then, instead of retiring or declining with age, you pivot. You take your accumulated wisdom, your deep understanding of human biology and problem solving, and you apply it to architecture. You spend the next century designing buildings that incorporate everything you learned about human physiology during your medical career. Then, at age 240, you transition again. Maybe you become an artist or a philosopher or an engineer. Each new field benefits from everything you've learned in your previous incarnations. You're not just changing jobs, you're accumulating layers of expertise that compound across centuries. The gig economy we're familiar with today evolves into what economists call the century economy. Employers begin posting job listings for 100-year projects. Imagine responding to a job posting that says, seeking project manager for terraforming Venus. Position requires 50 years of atmospheric engineering experience. Contract length, 125 years. Must be willing to relocate to orbital habitat. Job interviews take on completely new dimensions. Instead of asking, where do you see yourself in 5 years? Recruiters probe deeper. Where do you see yourself in 2 centuries? What skills do you plan to develop in your 3rd century? How do your 1st century experiences prepare you for multi-century project management? Universities completely reinvent themselves around these new realities. Instead of 4-year degrees, they offer millennium degrees, educational programs designed to unfold over entire lifespans. You might spend your 1st century studying fundamental sciences, your 2nd century specializing in applications, your 3rd century teaching and research. with sabbaticals every few decades for real-world experience and reflection. The relationship between education and work becomes fluid in ways we can barely imagine. You're simultaneously student and teacher, apprentice and master, researcher and practitioner, sometimes all at the same time. The artificial boundaries between learning and doing dissolve when you have centuries to develop expertise. But here's where the economic implications become truly staggering. Resource management and sustainability aren't just idealistic goals anymore. They become mathematical necessities. When your customers live for 500 years, planned obsolescence becomes economically catastrophic. Why would someone buy a new phone every 2 years when they need products that last centuries? Every industry transforms around durability and longevity. Cars aren't designed to last 10 or 15 years. They're engineered for 100-year lifespans with modular components that can be upgraded as technology evolves. Houses aren't built for 30-year mortgages, but for 1,000-year habitation, with foundation systems designed to adapt to centuries of technological change. Cities completely rebuild themselves around this new reality. Infrastructure projects become multi-century endeavors. The subway system begun in 2200 might not be completed until 2400, but that's okay because the planners who started it will still be alive to see it finished. Urban planning becomes an art form, practiced across centuries, with master architects spending lifetimes perfecting single districts. The throwaway culture of the early 21st century becomes as primitive and incomprehensible as stone tools. Sustainability isn't an environmental movement anymore, it's basic economic sense. When everyone lives for centuries, waste becomes mathematically unsustainable. New industries emerge that we can barely conceive of today. Memory management services help people organize and access centuries of accumulated experiences. Century planning consultants guide individuals through the psychological challenges of multi-century goal setting. Temporal psychology becomes a major field, helping people navigate the unique mental health challenges of extreme longevity. Personal finance advisors become more like life architects, helping clients plan economic strategies that span centuries. They might recommend spreading career changes across multiple centuries to optimize earning potential, or suggest specific timing for major purchases based on expected technological developments decades in the future. The relationship between work and meaning transforms completely. When you have centuries to develop mastery, work becomes less about survival and more about contribution. People can afford to spend decades on passion projects that might not pay immediately, but could transform entire fields over time. The luxury of time allows for levels of craftsmanship and innovation that are impossible when you're racing against mortality. Consider what becomes possible when researchers can dedicate multiple centuries to single problems. Cancer researchers who can work on the same challenges for 200 years, accumulating knowledge and insight that no previous generation could achieve. Artists who spend centuries perfecting techniques, creating works of complexity and beauty that require lifetimes to complete. But there's a dark side to this economic transformation that we can't ignore. Wealth inequality takes on dimensions that would make today's disparities look trivial. People who get an early start on wealth accumulation, say, in their first century, end up with economic advantages that compound across centuries into godlike financial power. Imagine competing economically against someone who's had a 400-year head start on building wealth. Networks, knowledge, and influence. Traditional concepts of economic mobility break down when some people have centuries of accumulated advantages over others. The phrase old money takes on entirely new meaning when we're talking about money that's literally centuries old. Labor markets stratify in unprecedented ways. Entry-level positions require decades of experience simply because that's what becomes normal when people have centuries to accumulate expertise. Young people, and by young, I mean people in their first century, struggle to compete with workers who've had multiple centuries to perfect their skills. New forms of economic discrimination emerge based on age cohorts. Employment bias isn't just about being too old anymore. It's about complex temporal prejudices. Some employers prefer workers from specific centuries, believing that certain time periods produced better employees. Others discriminate against the ultra-aged, claiming that people over 300 years old can't adapt to rapid technological change. Currency itself might transform. When everyone lives for centuries, the very concept of money as a store of value changes. Some economists predict the development of temporal currencies, money that's specifically designed to hold value across centuries, with inflation rates calculated across lifetime spans rather than annual periods. Investment strategies become incomprehensibly sophisticated. Portfolio managers develop century-spanning plans that account for technological revolutions, societal changes, even climate shifts that unfold across hundreds of years. Risk assessment expands to consider threats and opportunities that won't materialize for decades or centuries. The concept of retirement becomes meaningless when people live for 5 centuries. Instead of working for 40 years and retiring for 20, people might work for 60 years, take a 30-year sabbatical, work for another 70 years, take another break, and repeat this cycle multiple times across their extended lifespans. Social safety nets transform to accommodate multi-century lives. Unemployment insurance might need to support someone for decades while they retrain for entirely new careers. Healthcare systems must plan for medical needs that span centuries. Pension systems, if they still exist, must account for people who might collect benefits for 300 or 400 years. The gig economy evolves into something called serial mastery economy. Instead of having multiple small gigs, people have sequential major careers. You might be a full-time surgeon for 80 years, then a full-time artist for 90 years, then a full-time teacher for 70 years. Each transition becomes a major life event, requiring years of preparation and education. But perhaps the most profound change is psychological. When you have centuries to build wealth, the entire relationship with money and success transforms. The desperate urgency that drives much of today's economic behavior, the need to achieve financial security before you're too old, disappears. People can afford to think in truly long-term cycles, to make investments and decisions based on century-spanning strategies rather than quarterly profits. Economic systems adapt to serve people who think in geological timescales while maintaining the energy and capability of youth. Money becomes a tool for century-spanning projects rather than short-term survival. Work becomes about mastery and contribution rather than just making ends meet. The economy of endless time isn't just bigger or more complex than today's economy. It's qualitatively different, based on fundamentally different assumptions about human potential, planning horizons, and the relationship between time and value. But with all this time, with all these centuries of potential experience and growth, what happens to the human mind? How does consciousness itself adapt to spans of time that dwarf entire civilizations? Thomas wakes up confused. It's a Tuesday morning in the year 2511, but in his mind, it's 2448. He's 327 years old, but he believes he's 254. His wife of 2 centuries, Elena, is suddenly a stranger to him. His children, now older than he was when they were born, seem like imposters who've somehow invaded his home. He's experiencing his first temporal break, a phenomenon that psychiatrists in this era have come to recognize as almost inevitable among the ultra-aged. Thomas stares at Elena across the breakfast table, and she might as well be an alien. The woman he's loved for 200 years has vanished from his memory, replaced by a confused conviction that he's living in the wrong decade with the wrong people in the wrong life. The episode passes in 3 days. Like fog lifting from a valley, his memories gradually reassemble themselves into the correct temporal order. Elena transforms from stranger back into beloved. His adult children become familiar again. The year 2511 stops feeling like science fiction and becomes simply now. But the experience leaves Thomas shaken in ways that shorter-lived humans could never understand. This is what happens when the human mind, evolved for perhaps 80 years of experience, tries to contain centuries of memory, relationship, and accumulated time. Temporal displacement disorder has become epidemic among the ultra-aged. Support groups form in every major city where confused tricentenarians help each other remember which decade they're actually living in. The symptoms are as varied as they are disorienting. Some people get stuck in temporal loops, reliving the same decade over and over again in their minds while their bodies continue aging. Others experience what psychologists call century jumping. Their consciousness bounces randomly between different periods of their lives, unable to maintain stable presence in the current moment. Sarah, now 412 years old, describes it like this. Imagine your life is a massive library with 500 rooms, each one representing a different year you've lived. Normally, you can walk through the library in order, visiting whatever room you want, always knowing which room you're currently in. But sometimes the lights go out and you get lost. You open a door expecting to find the year 2511, and instead you're back in 2378. And it feels completely real until you realize your wife looks too young and your children are missing. Yet here's what's absolutely fascinating. Adaptation emerges from this struggle in ways that reveal incredible things about human consciousness. People begin developing what researchers call cyclical identity patterns. Instead of fighting the mind's tendency to drift across temporal periods, they begin deliberately reinventing themselves every 70 to 100 years. The Phoenix practice becomes standard among the ultra-aged. It's a conscious, ceremonial death and rebirth of personality that allows for fresh perspectives while maintaining core memory and wisdom. People plan these transitions carefully, sometimes spending years preparing for their psychological metamorphosis. At age 197, Maria decides it's time for her second Phoenix. She spent her first century as a scientist, her second century as an artist. Now she wants to become something entirely different, maybe a philosopher or a teacher or an explorer. The Phoenix practice isn't just about changing careers. It's about consciously choosing to let old patterns of thinking, old habits, old assumptions die so that new ones can be born. The ceremony itself varies from person to person, but it always involves some form of symbolic death and rebirth. Maria spends 6 months in meditation retreat, deliberately reviewing her entire life, identifying which aspects of her personality she wants to preserve and which she wants to release. She writes letters to her future self, creates art that captures who she has been, then consciously lets go of old identities to make space for whoever she's about to become. When she emerges from retreat, she's recognizably Maria, but also genuinely different. Her friends and family attend a rebirth celebration, where they formally acknowledge that they're meeting Maria version 3.0. Some of her relationships don't survive the transition. People who loved Maria the artist struggle to connect with Maria the philosopher. But new relationships bloom, and old ones that had grown stale suddenly rediscover vitality. The Phoenix practice becomes so common that society develops entire support systems around it. Phoenix counselors specialize in helping people navigate these psychological transitions. Phoenix parties celebrate people entering their transformation periods. Phoenix grief therapy helps families process the loss of someone's old identity while welcoming their new incarnation. Some people choose radical reinvention, former soldiers becoming artists, scientists transforming into mystics, introverts becoming performers. Others maintain more continuity, keeping their core interests but approaching them from entirely new angles. A few become Phoenix addicts, reinventing themselves every few decades in increasingly dramatic ways, chasing the rush of perpetual self-transformation. But there's another adaptation strategy that's equally fascinating. Rather than cyclical reinvention, Some ultra-aged individuals develop what they call continuous identity through psychological maintenance. They become like master gardeners of their own consciousness, carefully pruning memories, cultivating certain aspects of personality while letting others fade, maintaining the essential core of who they are across centuries. These psychological gardeners develop incredibly sophisticated techniques for memory management. They practice selective remembering, consciously choosing which experiences to keep vivid and which to let fade into general wisdom. They develop what they call memory composting, taking painful or outdated experiences and deliberately processing them into general life wisdom, removing the emotional charge while preserving the lessons learned. The most successful ultra-age develop something that psychologists are calling temporal fluidity, the ability to exist fully in the present while maintaining easy access to centuries of experience. They move through time like dolphins move through water, diving deep into specific decades when they need to access particular memories or skills, but always surfacing back into the now. Watch someone with advanced temporal fluidity and it's mesmerizing. They'll be discussing current events with complete engagement, then seamlessly reference a similar situation from 2 centuries ago, providing perspective that spans lifetimes, then return to present focus without missing a beat. They've learned to treat their centuries of experience like a vast library they can consult without getting lost in the stacks. New forms of mental enhancement arise to support these adaptations. Meditation practices extend to decade-long retreats where people spend years processing their accumulated centuries of experience. These aren't escapes from life, but intensive psychological maintenance periods, like taking your mind in for a complete overhaul every 100 years or so. Pharmaceutical interventions help people process what's called temporal grief, the unique sorrow of outliving entire civilizations. Imagine watching every friend from your first century die of old age while you continue living. Imagine seeing entire cities you love demolished and rebuilt multiple times. Imagine watching art forms, music styles, entire languages rise and fall while you persist through it all. The grief is unlike anything shorter-lived humans experience, and it requires entirely new therapeutic approaches. Virtual reality technology developed specifically to help the ultra-aged relive lost centuries. These aren't just recordings or simulations. They're complete sensory reconstructions of past decades that allow people to revisit lost times with perfect fidelity. But VR addiction becomes a serious disorder. Some people get so lost in reliving the past that they lose connection with the present, spending years immersed in virtual decades. While their current lives deteriorate, the most successful psychological adaptation might be what researchers call experiential layering. Instead of trying to remember centuries of experience as discrete events, the mind learns to compress time into emotional and intellectual layers. Your first century becomes a foundational layer of core personality and basic life wisdom. Your second century adds layers of specialized knowledge and refined emotional intelligence. Your third century contributes advanced pattern recognition and deep philosophical understanding. These layers don't replace each other. They stack and interact in complex ways. When you encounter a new situation at age 350, you're not just drawing on current knowledge, but unconsciously accessing relevant patterns from all your previous centuries. Your response incorporates insights from your youth, wisdom from your middle centuries, and the deep pattern recognition that only comes from experiencing the same types of situations across multiple lifetimes. The really remarkable development is how memory itself evolves. Normal human memory works like a filing system. You store experiences in your brain and try to retrieve them when needed. But ultra-aged memory becomes more like a living ecosystem. Old experiences don't just sit there waiting to be remembered. They actively integrate with new experiences, creating hybrid insights that no one with a normal lifespan could achieve. Take someone like Dr. Yuki Tanaka, now 433 years old. She's been a physician for over 3 centuries, and her diagnostic abilities have become almost supernatural. When she examines a patient, she's not just seeing current symptoms. She's unconsciously accessing patterns from treating similar cases across multiple centuries, recognizing disease progressions that might take decades to fully manifest, seeing connections that would escape doctors with only decades of experience. But it's not just professional expertise that benefits from temporal layering. Emotional intelligence develops depths that are impossible in normal lifespans. Ultra-aged individuals can recognize relationship patterns that play out across decades. They can see the long-term consequences of emotional choices in ways that allow them to navigate complex social situations with incredible skill. However, there are darker aspects to ultra-aged psychology that we can't ignore. Some people develop what's called existential fatigue, a deep weariness that comes from having experienced too much. They've seen the same patterns repeat across centuries, watched the same types of conflicts play out again and again, with minor variations. Life begins to feel like an endless repetition, and some choose to end their extended lives, not from depression, but from a kind of philosophical exhaustion. Others develop temporal autism, or they become so focused on long-term patterns that they lose the ability to engage with immediate, short-term human concerns. They can predict social trends that will unfold over decades, but struggle to have a normal conversation about what to have for lunch. Their perspective becomes so vast that they lose connection with the human-scale experiences that give life, meaning the strangest psychological development might be what researchers call temporal synesthesia. Some ultra-aged individuals begin experiencing time as a physical sensation. They can feel the texture of different decades, taste the emotional flavor of different centuries, see time as colors and shapes that change based on the quality of their experiences. It's as if living through centuries changes not just memory but fundamental perception itself. Support systems develop to help people navigate these unique psychological challenges. Temporal therapy becomes a major field, with specialists who help people process centuries of accumulated experience. Sensory support groups provide community for people dealing with similar ultra-aged psychological issues. Temporal life coaches help people plan psychological development across multiple lifetimes, but perhaps the most beautiful adaptation is what some ultra-aged individuals achieve, a kind of psychological mastery that's only possible through centuries of conscious development. They become living libraries of human experience, wisdom keepers who've spent lifetimes learning not just how to survive but how to thrive. Across deep time, these psychological masters move through the world with a combination of deep serenity and childlike curiosity that's unlike anything in normal human experience. They've seen enough to understand the patterns, but they've lived long enough to remain fascinated by variations. They carry centuries of wisdom without being crushed by it, centuries of memory without being lost in it. The human mind, it turns out, is far more adaptable than we ever imagined. Given enough time and the right support, consciousness can expand to contain centuries of experience while maintaining vitality, growth, and the capacity for surprise. The ultra-aged don't just remember more, they think differently, feel differently, exist differently than any humans in history. But as remarkable as these psychological adaptations are, they're happening in the context of a world that's being built right now. The technologies that could make 5-century lifespans possible aren't science fiction anymore. They're being developed in laboratories. Today, the first human to live 500 years has already been born. Her name is Emma Chen, and right now, in 2024, she's 8 years old, living in Singapore with her parents, completely unaware that she will witness the year 2524. She's probably watching cartoons or playing with friends or learning to ride a bicycle, having no idea that the therapies being developed in laboratories around the world today will extend her life just long enough to reach the next breakthrough. and the next in an endless cascade of life extension that will carry her into the 26th century. This isn't speculation anymore. This is mathematical projection based on research that's happening right now, in real laboratories, with real funding, producing real results. Emma doesn't need to wait for some miraculous breakthrough in the distant future. She just needs the current breakthrough to work well enough to get her to the next one. Here's how the cascade works. By the time Emma is 50, around 2066, the senolytic drugs we talked about earlier will be refined and widely available. These drugs that clear out aging cells will add perhaps 20 healthy years to her life. That gets her to 70 with the biology of a 50-year-old. By the time she reaches what would have been her natural death around 2090, cellular reprogramming therapies will have matured. The Yamanaka factors that can reset cells to youthful states will be safe for whole-body treatment. This doesn't just slow her aging, it actively reverses it. Emma at 90 has the cellular age of 60, but more importantly, she has another century of life ahead of her. At 150, around 2170, nanotechnology will have developed to the point where microscopic machines can repair damage at the cellular level faster than it accumulates. Imagine having millions of tiny repair crews working inside your body 24/7, fixing DNA damage, clearing protein deposits, maintaining cellular machinery with precision that makes our current medicine look primitive. At 300, technologies we can't even imagine today will carry her forward. But we don't need to imagine them. We just need current research to continue progressing at its current rate. Each breakthrough builds on the last, and the people who benefit from one breakthrough live long enough to benefit from the next. This is called longevity, escape, velocity, the point where life extension technology improves faster than you age. Once you reach it, there's theoretically no upper limit to how long you could live. Emma Chen, that 8-year-old in Singapore, has an excellent chance of being the first human to experience this. The science is unfolding in waves that are visible right now, if you know where to look. Wave 1 is senescent cell removal, the zombie cell clearers we discussed. Companies like Unity Biotechnology are already testing these drugs in human trials. Early results show improvements in everything from joint health to cardiovascular function. People in their 80s are returning to the physical capability of their 50s. Wave 2 is genetic engineering focused on longevity. CRISPR gene editing technology is being refined to correct the fundamental errors in our genetic code that cause aging. Telomeres that shorten with each cell division can be lengthened. Proteins that misfold and cause cellular damage can be prevented from misfolding in the first place. DNA repair mechanisms can be enhanced beyond their natural efficiency. Companies like Altos Labs, backed by billionaires like Jeff Bezos, are pouring resources into cellular reprogramming research. Their goal isn't just to slow aging, but to reverse it at the cellular level. They're not trying to help you live to 95 instead of 85. They're trying to help you live indefinitely while maintaining the biology of youth. Wave 3 is artificial intelligence applied to longevity research. Machine learning algorithms are decoding the incredibly complex interactions between genes, proteins, cellular processes, and environmental factors that determine how we age. AI can process biological data at scales and speeds that human researchers never could, finding patterns and solutions that might take human scientists centuries to discover. Google's Calico division is using AI to analyze vast data sets of biological information, looking for the fundamental algorithms of aging. They're treating aging like a software problem that can be debugged and fixed. DeepMind, Google's AI research arm, has already made breakthroughs in protein folding prediction that are accelerating drug development across multiple fields. Wave 4 is replacement organ technology. We're not just talking about artificial hearts and kidneys anymore, but organs grown from your own stem cells that are genetically identical to your original parts, but biologically young. 3D bioprinting is advancing rapidly. Researchers have already successfully printed simple, tissues, and are working toward complete organs. Imagine being 300 years old but having a 20-year-old heart because you've replaced it multiple times throughout your extended life. Your liver, kidneys, lungs, all periodically renewed with fresh, genetically identical organs grown from your own cells. You're not an old person trying to maintain failing systems. You're a person with centuries of experience living in a perpetually maintained body. Wave 5 is nanotechnology, microscopic. Machines that can work inside your body to prevent and repair damage at the molecular level. This technology is still in early development, but the theoretical foundations are solid. Nanobots could repair DNA damage as it occurs, clear cellular waste products, even fight cancer by identifying and destroying malignant cells before they become tumors. Each wave builds on the previous ones and accelerates the development of the next. The current generation of longevity research isn't just adding years to life. It's laying the foundation for potentially unlimited human lifespans. But here's what's really remarkable. You don't need to wait for all these technologies to be perfected. You just need them to be good enough to get you to the next breakthrough. If current research can extend healthy human lifespan to 120 years, that gives us 40 more years to develop technologies that can extend it to 160. Those extra 40 years of research could yield technologies that extend life to 200 years, which gives us another 80 years to develop even more advanced life. Extension, the mathematics of compound. Technological progress means that relatively modest initial improvements in longevity research could lead to unlimited human lifespans within a few generations. Emma Chen doesn't need revolutionary breakthroughs in the next few years. She needs evolutionary improvements that keep coming fast enough to stay ahead of her aging process. Companies and research institutions around the world are racing to make this happen. The Methuselah Foundation offers prizes for longevity research breakthroughs. The Sense Research Foundation focuses on repairing the cellular damage that causes aging. The Buck Institute for Research on Aging studies the fundamental biology of the aging process. Billionaire investors are pouring money into longevity research at unprecedented scales. Peter Thiel has invested in multiple life extension companies. Larry Ellison has donated hundreds of millions to aging research. Sergey Brin has funded research into Parkinson's disease, partly motivated by his own genetic predisposition to the condition. This isn't just academic research anymore. This is a technological revolution with the potential to fundamentally transform what it means to be human. The first person to reach 150 years might celebrate their birthday in 2090. 200 years could become achievable by 2120. Each milestone makes the next more reachable, because the people who reach it have more time to develop the technologies needed for the next extension. But the science is developing unevenly. Some aspects of longevity research are advancing rapidly, while others face significant obstacles. Cellular reprogramming shows incredible promise, but carries risks of cancer if not precisely controlled. Genetic engineering can theoretically fix aging-related genes, but requires delivery systems that can safely modify cells throughout the entire body. Nanotechnology could provide unprecedented repair capabilities, but faces enormous challenges in manufacturing and safety testing. The timeline isn't certain, but the direction is clear. Multiple independent research paths are all pointing toward the same conclusion. Aging is a solvable engineering problem, not an inevitable biological fate. The question isn't whether we'll solve it, but how quickly and how safely. Some people will choose to embrace every available life extension technology as it becomes available. There'll be early adopters, taking calculated risks to extend their lives and benefit from future breakthroughs. Others will wait for technologies to be thoroughly tested and refined before adopting them. Society will split between the enhanced and the natural, creating the first true divergence in human evolution since our species emerged. The enhanced will live for centuries, accumulating knowledge, relationships, and capabilities that natural humans never could. The natural will lived traditional lifespans, but in a world increasingly dominated by people who've had centuries to build influence and understanding. The social, economic, and political implications are staggering, but for those who choose the path of life extension, 5 centuries becomes not a limit, but a beginning. The first wave of life extension technologies will likely extend healthy human lifespan to around 150 years. The second wave could push it to 300. The third wave might eliminate aging entirely, making death a choice rather than an inevitability. Emma Chen, now 8 years old, could live to see humanity's expansion to other star systems. The development of artificial intelligence that surpasses human capabilities. The solution to climate change through century-long environmental projects. Maybe even contact with intelligent life elsewhere in the universe. Her lifespan could encompass not just her own personal development across centuries, but the transformation of human civilization itself. The technologies being developed today aren't just extending individual lives. They're extending human potential. When people can live for centuries, they can undertake projects, develop relationships, pursue knowledge, and create art on scales that have never been possible in human history. 500 years becomes not just a number, but a new form of human existence. The first immortals are being born today. Their extended lives will unfold in a world transformed by their own longevity, where the boundaries between human and enhanced human blur and eventually disappear. Emma Chen and millions like her will become the first generation to experience what humans could become when time is no longer a constraint, and that transformation begins with humanity's next great adventure, one that requires not just longer lives, but the patience and wisdom that only deep time can provide. Sarah stands on the observation deck of the generation ship Horizon, watching Earth shrink to a point of light against the cosmic dark. She's 412 years old, and for the first time in her extended life, she feels genuinely ready for what comes next. The journey to Proxima Centauri will take 300 years, a span that once would have required multiple generations of humans to complete, now merely a single chapter in her extended existence. Think about what this means. For the first time in human history, we can contemplate interstellar travel not as a sacrifice that parents make for children they'll never see reach the destination, but as a journey that individuals can begin and complete within their own lifespans. Sarah isn't just a pioneer sending humanity to the stars. She's a tourist who will live to walk on another world. Around her on the observation deck, other multicentenarians prepare for departure. Dr. James Rodriguez, now 387 years old, spent his first century studying biology, his second mastering engineering, his third learning the intricate dance of terraforming ecosystems. He's not just along for the ride. He's spent lifetimes acquiring exactly the knowledge needed to seed life on a new world. Captain Liu Wei, at 453, has navigated Earth's oceans for 2 centuries before turning her attention to the cosmic sea. Her spatial intuition has been refined across lifetimes of understanding how vehicles move through 3-dimensional space. The skills that made her an exceptional ship captain on Earth translate directly to piloting humanity between stars. These aren't desperate refugees fleeing a dying planet. These are mature individuals who've spent centuries preparing for humanity's next chapter. They've mastered every discipline needed for interstellar colonization, not through rushed training programs, but through lifetimes of patient study and practice. Interstellar travel becomes possible, not because we've built faster ships, but because we've built longer lives. The psychological profiles of the Horizon's passengers reveal something unprecedented in human history. Every person aboard has lived long enough to overcome the restlessness and uncertainty that characterize shorter human lifespans. They've had centuries to discover who they really are, what they truly value, what they genuinely want to contribute to the universe. This isn't a ship of young adventurers seeking their fortunes. It's a vessel carrying humanity's wisest and most experienced individuals to establish civilization among the stars. But back on Earth, humanity is transforming into something equally remarkable. The patient work of centuries is bearing fruit in ways that would seem impossible to our current short-lived perspective. Cities grow like living organisms, their architecture evolving across decades to respond to changing needs. Buildings don't just house people, they adapt, learn, improve themselves through accumulated experience with their inhabitants. The urban planners designing these cities have had centuries to understand how communities develop over time. They've watched neighborhoods mature across lifetimes, observed how infrastructure needs change across generations, learned to design spaces that can evolve gracefully across centuries. Instead of tearing down and rebuilding every few decades, cities now grow continuously like ancient trees, adding rings of complexity and capability, environmental restoration projects that seemed impossible to shorter-lived. Humans become routine when people can dedicate centuries to single ecosystems. Dr. Maria Santos, now 297 years old, has spent her entire extended life restoring the Amazon rainforest. She's not just a researcher studying forest regeneration. She's a gardener who's had centuries to understand every species, every interaction, every subtle feedback loop that makes a healthy ecosystem function. Under her patient cultivation, forests that were clear-cut in the early 21st century have returned to complexity that surpasses their original state. She's had time to experiment, to make mistakes, to learn from failure across lifetimes of dedicated work. The Amazon under her care isn't just restored, it's evolved, enhanced, more resilient than the original forest ever was. Climate change, that seemingly intractable problem that plagued the early 21st century, reverses through the slow, steady work of people who refuse to die. When your timeline spans centuries rather than decades, you can undertake atmospheric engineering projects that require lifetimes to complete. Carbon capture becomes not a desperate short-term fix, but a patient, methodical process managed by people who will live to see its ultimate success. The social implications are equally profound. War becomes almost impossible when generals and political leaders must live with the consequences of their decisions for centuries. When you know you'll personally experience the long-term results of today's policies, the entire calculation of political risk and benefit changes dramatically. President Elena Vasquez, serving her third non-consecutive term over the span of 2 centuries, approaches international relations with a patience and long-term perspective that shorter-lived leaders could never achieve. She's personally negotiated with the grandchildren and great-grandchildren of leaders she first met centuries ago. She understands geopolitical patterns that play out across lifetimes because she's lived through multiple cycles of tension and resolution. Diplomacy becomes an art form practiced across centuries. Treaties aren't just documents signed by governments that might change in a few years. They're agreements between individuals who will personally enforce and live under them for hundreds of years. The incentive structure of international relations transforms when decision-makers have centuries to experience the consequences of their choices. But perhaps the most beautiful transformation is in human culture itself. Art forms develop that simply couldn't exist within normal human lifespans. Composer Yuki Nakamura, now 343 years old, is working on a symphony that's designed to be performed across an entire century. Different movements will premiere decades apart, with the complete work not reaching its finale until the year 2490. The audience for Nakamura's Century Symphony will literally grow up with the music. Children who hear the opening movements will be elderly by the time the final notes play. But in a world where people live for centuries, there will also be listeners who experience the entire symphony across their extended lifespans, understanding musical themes and developments that unfold across longer time frames than any previous art form. Literature evolves to accommodate multi-century attention spans. Novelist David Kim, at 268 years old, writes novels that are designed to be read across decades. His latest work, The Garden of Deep Time, releases one chapter per year, with character development and plot evolution that mirrors the slow, patient growth of actual human lives. Readers don't just follow characters through a story. They grow alongside them across real years and decades. Architecture becomes temporal art. Building designer Sofia Reyes, now 407 years old, creates structures that are meant to change and evolve across centuries. Her buildings aren't static monuments, but living spaces that adapt their form and function based on how they're used across lifetimes. What begins as residential housing might gradually transition to commercial space, then to community centers, then back to housing, all through organic architectural evolution guided by Sofia's century-spanning vision. But humanity doesn't just adapt to extended lifespans. It fractures into streams, each following different paths made possible by deep time. The explorers, like those aboard the Horizon, head to the stars, carrying human consciousness to other worlds. They're not fleeing Earth, but expanding the scope of human experience, planting seeds of civilization in the cosmic dark. The gardeners, like Dr. Santos and her forest restoration work, remain on Earth, but dedicate their extended lives to perfecting the planet. They spend centuries understanding and improving ecosystems, atmospheres, the delicate balance of life itself. Under their patient cultivation, Earth becomes not just restored, but enhanced. A garden planet tended by immortal gardeners who have literally all the time in the world. The dreamers choose a different path entirely. As virtual reality technology advances, some ultra-aged individuals upload their consciousness to digital realms where time has no meaning. They explore universes limited only by imagination, experience realities where the physics of aging, death, even causality itself can be rewritten. They don't reject physical reality. They expand beyond it. Each stream leads to its own transformation. The explorers become a spacefaring civilization, their extended lifespans perfectly suited to the vast distances between stars. The gardeners evolve into planetary stewards, their patience and wisdom growing alongside the ecosystems they tend. The dreamers transcend physical limitations entirely, becoming beings of pure consciousness, exploring realms of infinite possibility. Yet all these paths spring from the same source. The simple, revolutionary fact that death becomes a choice rather than an inevitability. When humans are no longer racing against mortality's deadline, we can undertake projects, build relationships, pursue understanding on scales that match the universe itself. Sarah, looking out at the stars from the Horizon's observation deck, represents something unprecedented in the 4-billion-year history of life on Earth. She's a conscious being with enough time to truly understand her place in the cosmos. The journey to Proxima Centauri isn't just about reaching another star. It's about humans finally becoming worthy companions to the universe's vast patience. The human story, once rushed by mortality's urgent deadline, becomes an epic without end. We transform from mayflies, frantically cramming meaning into brief lifespans, to sequoias, growing slowly and steadily toward unimaginable heights. We change from sparks that flare briefly and die to stars that burn steadily across eons. The universe, vast and patient, operating on timescales of billions of years, finally finds in humanity a companion measured in its own time. When humans can think in centuries, we can begin to appreciate cosmic processes that unfold across millennia. When we can plan across lifetimes, we can participate in the universe's own patient work of creating complexity, consciousness, beauty, and in that transformation, we discover that 500 years was never the destination. It was just the first step in a journey that leads toward something even more remarkable. A future where the only limit on human potential is our own imagination. Where the only deadline is the one we choose to set. Where the only death is the one we consciously accept. The infinite horizon stretches before us, not as an impossible dream, but as an achievable reality. The technologies exist, the research is progressing, the first immortals are already being born. What we do with forever, that's the next chapter in the human story. And for the first time in our species' history, we have all the time in the universe to write it well. The transformation is already beginning. The future of human consciousness, human potential, human destiny unfolds not in some distant tomorrow, but starting right now. With each breakthrough in laboratories around the world, with each person born who might live to see the stars, forever isn't just possible anymore. It's coming, and it's going to be extraordinary.